This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Peden, and I work as a client advocate for the DOVES program. Joining me today from DOVES is fellow client advocate Jennifer Ponce, and from Legal Aid of Nebraska, REACH project attorney Danny Reynaga. Hi, guys. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Well. Excellent. All right. Well, we wanted to get together and talk a little bit today because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we would like to take this opportunity to share some information about domestic violence and how, as family, friends, and community members, we can support survivors. We'll also share information about resources available to survivors and highlight some of the legal issues that survivors often have questions about. So I thought we could start off with talking a little bit about the history of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Domestic Violence Awareness Month actually began from the Day of Unity that the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence created in October of 1981. And the intent was to connect advocates across the nation who were working to end violence against women and children. So the Day of Unity soon became an entire week that was devoted to mourning those who have died because of domestic violence, celebrating those who have survived, and connecting those who work to end violence. In October of 1987, the first National Domestic Violence toll-free hotline was established, and it was the first time that Domestic Violence Awareness Month was observed. Since 1989, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence has worked on legislation to have Domestic Violence Awareness Month recognized each year. And so that is where Domestic Violence Awareness Month came from on the national level. So we are going to, so Danny, if you want to share a little bit about Nebraska's history.
Sure. Yeah. So the legislative history behind domestic violence actually predates that even. In 1978 was the first time that we see the domestic violence situation kind of come on the scene. We had legislation that essentially created what we now consider the domestic protection orders that we see. And so, yeah, we're talking about 42 years ago, and it's been continually evolving. Obviously, society has changed. If you look back at the legislative record, you kind of see some differing opinions back then about how domestic relations, intertwined with domestic violence. And so, yeah, I mean, we have a pretty long history of having these recognitions of there being a problem. And that being said, there's, even more recently, we've had some more, an evolution of protection orders in particular. Nebraska didn't have a harassment protection order statute until 1992. So even more recently, we're talking about recognizing, violence outside of the traditional, household setting. And then it was just a few years ago. I mean, I'm sure you guys know, but in 2017 was when we saw the sexual assault protection orders come out. And it's a little crazy to think that it took that long to get, really understand the breadth of protection orders and the issues with domestic violence and kind of everything that comes out of that. So there's definitely been a progression that we've had over the last few decades. And I think as we'll talk about later today, there's just more awareness now, I think, than there was before. There's a better understanding. And I think there's been, a lot of culture shift that we've seen. So yeah, it's definitely something that's definitely evolved.
Great. I think in the past, domestic violence was really considered a private family matter. I remember even my parents saying things like, oh, well, you made your bed, lie in it, like, you picked your own situation, or, you don't talk about things outside the family, things along those lines. It was more socially acceptable to use physical violence against your spouse and children. In fact, there was a survey that was conducted in October of 1968 that found that 1 in 5 people approved of slapping one's spouse on appropriate occasions, however they determined that as appropriate. So over the last 40 to 50 years, public opinion has changed considerably and domestic violence has become less acceptable. However, many times survivors still keep silent because of the stigma associated with domestic violence. Maybe many feel isolated or they blame themselves for what they're experiencing. And oftentimes survivors get very mixed messages that seem to blame them, like they must like it to be abused because they stay, or maybe they're emotionally weak, or they keep making bad decisions. So it's their fault, or they don't do anything to help themselves. I think there's a lot of that stigma and a lot of that blame. But that really shows how little the general public understands about the dynamics of abuse and the challenges that survivors face. So I think that there has been a lot has changed, but there's still some people and some opinions out there that really keep survivors silent.
Yeah, and I think kind of, Lisa, what you were talking about though was, when you mentioned it, a lot of people just don't fully understand, don't talk about it. A lot of that was just, right, how taboo of a subject it's been. And we've, like I mentioned, we've seen a little bit of a culture shift away from viewing it as taboo. But I think that's why this type of events, type of month is so important, that we got to talk about it so we kind of understand it better.
Well, and if you think about it too, you mentioned in 1978, kind of the start of things. DOVES started in 1979 as a phone outside, out of the Scottsbluff County Sheriff's Office. It was just a phone that was ringing that people would answer. And so before that, what did people do when they needed help? Did you even get help? Could you even find access? So it's nice that as this movement has grown, access to help has come available. It's always going to be changing because our awareness grows, like you said. People understand a little bit more, and it's nice to see some progression and some changes and more protections for people, because it does show that there is some grasp of the issues by regular society, enough that it can push those into being.
And I think originally when people oftentimes think about domestic violence, they picture like physical violence or physical injuries. But domestic violence takes many forms, including emotional and verbal abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse inside that relationship, and at times physical violence. And so it's important that people recognize that an abusive person will use a variety of tactics to gain control over the victim and to maintain that control. And so when you look at domestic violence, we want people to understand the ramifications of all those different types of abuse and why all of those different tactics may keep somebody in that relationship or may keep them feeling like they have no options. And so when you look at that, I thought, Jen, if you could talk a little bit about, how we can help friends or family members if they are experiencing domestic violence.
Okay, so one of the important things to think about is that someone who is related to you, someone who is your friend, they're probably going to come to you first. So it can be really helpful for you to know a little bit more about what domestic violence looks like, what the patterns are, etc. Our website has great information about domestic violence. If you want to go visit it at www.dovesprogram.com. There's lots of resources out there to find more information. As friends and family members, being up to date and knowledgeable about domestic violence and what it looks like, that it's more than just slapping and hitting. Not to minimize those things, because that's a big part too, but to understand that it's a very complex situation. It can be a very dangerous situation, and to kind of acknowledge that the person that came to you with this problem, it has a problem that's not going to go away by you saying just leave. So it's important to kind of think about how you can best help, and also consider what your boundaries are so that you can keep yourself safe, so that you can keep yourself healthy, so that you can continue helping them as they go. One of the most important things you can do, aside from being knowledgeable, is just to believe what they say and to listen. Empathy goes a long way. You don't have to solve their problem for them. They might not even be looking for you to solve the problem. It really is just about listening, finding out what's going on, validating their experiences, and giving them this platform where they can talk. A lot of people, I think, undervalue the importance of listening, so that's really a good thing to do. With the boundaries, it's important to have self-care. It's important to say what you can and can't do. You don't have to do everything for them, and you shouldn't. It should be something where you can say, how best can I help you? Or these are 3 things that I can help with. I can provide your kids transportation for a couple weeks. I could give you money if you need to get into an apartment, and I can give you food. So those are the 3 things I can do. And then you can be okay saying no to other things, or, you know, refer them to DOVES or other programs in their area that can help them more extensively. As far as being community members being able to help, being knowledgeable again, consistently addressing victim blaming whenever you hear it. So whether it's online or in person, being able to say, you know, being knowledgeable about domestic violence, then you can say stuff like, you know, it's really hard for people to leave relationships. Sometimes it takes up to 7 times on average or more for people to leave. They go back because they don't have enough resources. They weren't ready yet. They weren't able to do it financially. The abuser continued to abuse even after. You know, so shutting down a lot of that victim blaming can be really helpful. Acknowledging in yourself why victim blaming happens. So a lot of times victim blaming happens because you're trying to figure out what not to do so that you don't do it, so that you're safe. So in a way, it's kind of you know, you're trying to make yourself safe. So if I figure out how you're being abused, I can just not do those things, and then I can be safe. So that kind of is somewhat where the victim blaming is happening, plus just a misunderstanding of what domestic violence is and how difficult it can be to get away from a situation like that. So just acknowledging that it happens, being good bystanders. So if you see something happening, you don't necessarily have to put yourself in harm's way. You don't necessarily have to go in guns blazing. There's lots of different things that you can do. So it's important to think about what you would do in different situations. Are you kind of a funny person? Can you diffuse the situation? Can you quietly pull someone aside later? Do you need to call the police? What are the ramifications of calling the police? Will that make the situation worse for that person later? So, you know, thinking about some of those things, being prepared for those things before they happen can be really helpful, because then you feel a little bit more comfortable. You feel like you can step in, and you might not ever know, but that victim, that survivor, could value that stepping in more than you ever know. It could be the first time anyone's ever acknowledged that what's happening is wrong. It could be the time that decides them that, yep, this time I am leaving, this is it. It could be the moment when you validated the harm that's being caused and you've shifted their thinking. So even if you never hear from them again, you may have changed their life significantly. So always be willing to do something, even if you're not directly involved.
You know,
Yeah.
And again, just to butt in there just a little bit, I think what you mentioned earlier about being prepared, at least mentally prepared to handle that situation, is so critical. And it's a training thing, right? I mean, like, we as professionals, as advocates or attorneys or whatever, we're trained to handle the issues. And you know, just a few weeks ago, I guess a couple months ago now, I had that exact scenario. I get to work, I park my car, and I start going into our office. Our office is closed to the public, but and as I'm walking across the street, I see what clearly, at least retrospectively, what was clearly you know, a domestic fight going on. I didn't witness any physical stuff, but it was very clearly you know, aggression from, you know, one person to the other. And as much as it shames me to say, at least for a split second there, I thought to myself, okay, I'm gonna let them handle. I'm not gonna get involved. I got a lot of work to do today. I need to get going. I don't have time to deal with it. So I get into my office and walk about 10 steps to my desk, and then realize, no, I need to call the police. Like, what I saw was clearly something that, you know, is going to require police intervention. And I'm glad I did, because it could have been something worse. The police came. I didn't see if they arrested anyone in particular, but yeah, I may never know. Maybe that person didn't want me to call the police, but I know I would have been thinking about it the rest of the day. And like I said, it's even me who, you know, quote unquote professional, when you get into those situations, because they don't happen every day, we're not necessarily mentally prepared to handle those, even just as bystanders. And which can even be more difficult if it's somebody you know.
I
Absolutely.
think one of the things that I have really found, I think that Jen has shared before, is just to like check in with the person and be like, hey, are you okay? Or like, is everything going okay over there? Or something along those lines. That can be really like hard to do that, but it's also like maybe one way to interrupt the situation or things like that. I think it was really wise of you to trust your instinct to be like, hey, this may need some additional help that I can't do, and it's more safe for the police to check out what's going on than me to check, to see what's happening or get involved in that, because you don't know. And I think as a society, when we do speak up and we do say something, that validates the victim, knowing that, what's happening isn't okay, and that they do have the right to be treated well and not to be hurt. And so I think that to me is one of the biggest pieces of why talking about domestic violence, why even having awareness months or talking about it throughout the year is so important, because people may recognize that something's not going right in their relationship, but they don't necessarily see the full picture or the dynamics, or they feel like, I'm to blame or no one's going to believe me. But when you have more awareness about these issues and people are more empathetic or sympathetic to what victims are going through, then that goes a long way to show that community support, and that they are not alone, and that they don't have to continue to fight through this by themselves. And that's why we want to make sure that people are aware of what resources are really out there for people who are experiencing abuse. And so, Danny, would you share just a little bit about how people can connect with an advocate or connect with yourself through legal aid?
Yeah, absolutely. So Legal Aid is a statewide organization. We have an office here at the Scottsbluff location, and what people can do is they can call our access line. That's the best way someone can go and see if they qualify for assistance. At the very least, we try to assist with legal helpers, or excuse me, like getting some sort of information in front of them. If it's something that requires representation, then there may be an opportunity to get an attorney. But that access line is probably the best way to get a hold of us. You can call the number or you can do an application online. So that's the best way to get a hold of legal aid. And a lot of times we tell people it's best to try to reach legal aid before the stuff hits the fan, so to speak, because there's a lot of mitigation that can happen for a lot of issues that surround domestic violence, right? So things like divorces, custody, anything like that is very helpful to get some information before things escalate, so someone can feel more empowered in their decisions. So yeah, I think the best way is to try to call the access line, get some legal assistance that way. But yeah, I mean, the REACH program that I work under aims to help victims of domestic violence. So one of the things that I do a lot is help people with protection orders, custody issues, divorces, kind of everything that involves being a victim of domestic violence.
Well, and the nice thing is that's one of the barriers sometimes for people leaving, is they don't have the money to get a lawyer. So our relationship with Legal Aid is awesome, because that's one less barrier that they have to try and surmount doing what they do.
Right, yeah, and like you said, there's unfortunately one of the biggest barriers, yes, is children in a relationship, and the process, as most people know, is not necessarily easy. Attorneys aren't always required, aren't always necessary, but they're usually helpful. So, like I said, being aware of what rights you might have, what implications your decisions might have later on, can really help someone, I think, get out of a bad situation where they feel like there's no other options.
Yep. I would completely agree. I think those are one of the threats about children and custody and divorce, and all of those things are one of the main tactics that I've observed as an advocate over the years, is that an abusive partner will use those issues to give them misinformation, tell them different different things that, you know, they are not true, but as a victim, you don't necessarily know what is true, what is not true, like what your rights are, what legally can be done, can't be done. And the threat to take away someone's children or not let you see them, I mean, that can be a very, very powerful threat to maintain that control in the relationship. And so I completely agree with you, Danny, and I'm so glad that legal aid is available to people to help explain those rights, explain those decisions, explain like what all of that entails, because when you have more information, you can make a more informed decision, and then you have more power back in that relationship. And so we are really glad to have that opportunity. DOVES does have the option to provide some direct referrals to legal aid for our clients specifically, and we wanted to make sure that people knew how to reach out to our program. Jennifer mentioned our website earlier, which is dovesprogram.com. We do have a 24-hour helpline available at 866-95-DOVES. And we also have a 24-hour text line, and the text line number is 515-599-6620. And we do also through our website have a chat feature available as well. So people can go to dovesprogram.com and chat with our advocates during our regular business hours. So we want to make sure that people can access our services, people knowing that our services are free and they are confidential. We do describe, you know, what things we can, if there are any limitations to our confidentiality, we talk about those. And then we just provide a lot of information, a lot of support, a lot of options. Our goal at the DOVES program is not to tell anybody what to do or what they have to do. It's to listen to their situation, help them think about their options, and help them explore those options and address any barriers that they may feel are keeping them from being able to make a decision. And so I wanted just to make sure that people were aware of how to get a hold of us. And then would you share Legal Aid's website as well, Danny, so people can get to Legal Aid and look at the access line and your services there?
Sure. And let me grab the card so I don't misspeak here. Of course, like I said, going to legalaidofnebraska.org is the best way to get all the information, the hours that our access line is available, the different numbers that you can call. But it's legalaidofnebraska.org.
Anything else that anyone would like to add before we wrap up our conversation today?
I'll just make a quick note, Lisa, you talked about confidentiality. I think that is a very important piece of what DOVES does and what we do. We understand how very important confidentiality can be. Taking that first step is a very scary step for a lot of people, and some situations they're even dangerous. And so at least at Legal Aid, and I know at DOVES, one of the things we try to make sure is that people feel comfortable when they call and they know exactly the extent of what we're here to do, and you know, what we will and won't share.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Danny and Jennifer. I hope that this information has been helpful, and we look forward to working together more in the future. Thank you.